Who would love to take pride in the so-called cultural names that sound so abusive, primitive, and impolite? Who would love to take pride in a continent that survives with talented, gifted, and skilled people, but denies them opportunity to develop their talentedness? Who would love to identify themselves with a continent that is socially and academically designed to be consumers of other people's productions? Who would love to identify themselves with a continent that is designed to be submissive to all other people, who love to identify themselves with a continent that is known for its history of colonialism, slavery, and subjugation, who would love to identify themselves with a continent that takes the back seat in the issues of global importance, be it economics, medicine, music, sports, you name it, who would love to identify themselves with all these kind of tragedies? No, no, no. With all of these tragedies and negative history of Africa, it is no longer my motherland. I'm to find another mother. Today on our show, we are here to deflate the debate of whether Africa's history and truth is good enough to take pride in as its people, as its children. Today on our show, I'm hosting Seriang Henry, a very influential figure whose brain muscles of reasoning and intellect have passed through different gyms of learning that have shaped him and qualifying him to be a very good man to host on this show for this incredible and contentious event. He started his journey at God's Grace Primary School in Gomba District, complicated himself with a high school education at Our Lady Consolata High School, then Chiso City Secondary School, where he laid a firm and memorable legacy with good academic achievements and student leadership. He is currently a champion working in African spaces of engineering, especially in mechanics, and he's always never afraid to speak about issues that really matter to the African people. Mr. Seriang,
Yes,
grateful to have you on the show.
in your presence to deliver some content to our fellow human race and the rest of the entire world, which at least will stand as a remarkable blow to the turn of history, to the turn of our minds, especially we, the black Africans, and it will change our image on the entire world coastline. I thank you for this opportunity given to me, and I truly appreciate it.
Okay, Mr. Seriang, first things first, allow me to call you and we mourn together in this tragedy and catastrophe of being born African and having of being born African and living on this continent that is only known about very many negatives, colonialism, slavery, talk about it, nothing good. Allow me call you so that we can mourn together in this tragedy of negatives and lack about this African continent, which happens to be our motherland.
Unfortunately, with your invitation and due respect to your position and stand, I can't join you to mourn the same way because there is no need to mourn. You've spoken a lot of things about the black race, about the African continent. You're regarding it as a country of the lesser God, which to my contemplation does not apply. Africa is such a blessed land. We Africans are such blessed people, only that we are turning to be Eurocentric in all our aspects of life, socially, economically, religiously, politically, and in all other aspects of life. We have decided to turn to the Western influence. That's the reason as to why we are the only race, or we are the only continent that is referred to as Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, and very soon we shall be referred to as Arabophone. So, in that way, I can't join you to mourn in the same manner, yet I know the true realities of our black continent.
Mr. Seriange, You have said that there is some much more better reality than actually the books of history tell us about. There's no doubt that the African continent, and we can't neglect that we were once slaves. We are, we are social and academically designed to be consumers of other people's productions. With full plates of good fertile soils and natural resources and good climate, Africans continue to die of hunger only to fail to grow food. Mr. Siriang, what is good about the African history that you're trying to take pride in, and what is good about it?
Back then, in the 11th century, there are so many things that happened here in Africa and they are not being talked about in the Eurocentric sources of information. Africa has been thriving even before slavery, even before the arrival of colonialists. Africa was here and it is having very great history. In terms of agriculture, you've stated a statement that we cannot feed ourselves. When we go to the terms or to the field of agriculture, we are so much developed, only that we have been dragged behind by the arrival of other civilizations in Africa. Before the arrival of other civilizations in Africa, I will start with the field of agriculture. We are the initiators or we are the creators of different agricultural systems such as terracing. When you talk of irrigation, they were all being done here in Africa. Irrigation was taking place before the arrival of other civilizations on the banks of African rivers such as Nile and River Niger. People were irrigating crops in times of drought, and food was being produced. The statement that Africa cannot feed herself came to its rise when other civilizations had put a hand in the affairs of Africa. Because before their arrival, Africa was feeding herself and it was not exporting. She was not exporting anything from any other civilization. But the reason as to why now Africa can't feed herself, it is because these civilizations have damaged our soils with different chemicals, despite the fact that engineering was here in Africa and everything was being done here in Africa. So other civilizations have totally made Africa a mess. We had very different systems in Africa. Africa has a very rich and great history, which is not told in the sources of information, which earlier, before I say they are Eurocentric.
Mr. Siriang, besides agriculture, what are other different things that Africa has that what are other different things that were done in the past about Africa that the young children could actually take pride in?
There are so many stories that are not told in the books and in all sources of information. There are so many and they are hidden. As earlier I told you that Africa was anciently organized in different sources and in different systems. So, so many things are there. When you talk of architecture, I will take you back then around the 11th and the 15th century in the Great Zimbabwe. When you look at the Great Zimbabwe, it was greatly organized in the system of architecture, where they built very many structures using dry stones and without mortar.
Sure.
And to my surprise, still up to now, these structures still stand. When you look at the great churches of Libela in Ethiopia, they still stand. They were carved. When you go to the field of production, Africa had very many things that she manufactured. Around the 11th century, we were producing carbon steel, which was not produced by the European civilization until 1800s. So Only our partisan industries have been dragged behind because of the system of inferiority complex. Africa's history has been buried, and we are thriving because we are thriving on European influence. Other civilizations have taken our partisan industry, human resource that could have been used to develop African skills, and so many other belongings of Africa have been exported to Europe. I think you know about that. Recently, now we are being exported to UAE. The Arabs are summoning our president. So it is in total mess. If Africa does not wake up to unbury that hidden history of ours, it is not just laid on what we read in books. There are so many people we have had so many warriors in Africa which are not being talked about, that resisted the colonial influence for decades, and they are not being talked about in the books. Reason being, Europe has set what Africa should be and what Africa should move on with.
Mr. Sirianga, you've talked about the great walls of Zimbabwe that were built without mortar. Can how real is this that the African minds, how able is this real that this civilization and this architectural engineering could be invented by Africans?
Engineering was developing here in Africa not until the arrival of foreign influence. I told you that there are so many things that were being involved in Africa. In terms of social, Africans were creating so many things. By the arrival of other civilization into Africa, Africa was manufacturing fridges, even though they were not so sophisticated as the current ones that are being exported from Europe. But these fridges could at least keep our water very cold and in a very good condition.
What are those fridges?
These were pots.
What?
They were not so sophisticated as we are seeing current fridges, but they were doing for us a very good job. Very healthy with no any health threat, and in a very good condition. We were organized in terms of security. Africans were manufacturing bows and arrows, of which were being used to promote security in Africa. A lot of things were being made here in Africa, only that our brains, to our only sadness, has been frozen by the Western influence. We have been made dependent rather than involving in artisan industries to develop our own continent.
Mr. Seriangi, you talked about the fridges, you talked about the engineering buildings and very many other things. What other things in the aspect of of music? Talk about music itself. Very many things. African music itself, which sounds so disgusting. Today we have the pianos, today we have the drums, today we have what? My friends, Africa was actually sleeping.
Those instruments you're talking about, actually they were invented here in Africa. When you look at the current piano, it is having black and white
Keys.
keys. So why do you think black and white keys? Huh? Perhaps the original piano was invented here in Africa, and those were the xylophones.
Sure.
The xylophones, that is the original piano. So it was just sophisticated by the Western world. The reason as to why it is having black and white keys, it is a combination of white and black ideas to come up with a sophisticated piano. But the original piano were the xylophones. Music was so organized here. When you look at African music, it was actually produced in an African way with a mix of those instruments, the xylophones, the adungus, and so many things that entice Africa. Music was here in Africa because we are being trained in the ancient Africa in our own way. The only problem is that Western influence have tried their level best to cling onto us. which is making us lag behind.
Mr. Young, we talk about the governance structure and system of administrations in Africa. Here we are seeing a very bad dilemmas happening here in Africa with the current democracies that they are having and very many things. Talk about very many things here in Africa. They look so disgusting.
Actually, if Africa had not adopted a system that is not her own, we would be having an Eden in Africa. When you look at all African countries at the eve of their independence, respective of their years and dates, each African country that was gaining her own independence, which we were lied to, I suspect they were not independencies. Because after granting us the so called independence, the Europeans were developing a new system which is now taking up Africa, and it is very dangerous, and that's none other than neo-colonialism. So there is that black African American whose statement I regard so prophetic, who stated that Africa will not develop and will not go ahead with a system that is not of her own. Why did he say so? Every African country that regained her independence from the sovereignty colonizers, it adopted a system of the very colonizers. For example, look at a country like Kenya. When they were given independence and they were so told that they were given independence, they adopted a full system from Britain and implanted it in Kenya. So there cannot be any development with a foundation that is not of yourself.
Okay, Mr. Seriange, we have seen the adopted systems of government like democracy in Africa have proved to be failures. And
They have not proved it
this
to
is
be failures, but they are total failures. If initially we had stayed on the systems that were there in Africa before, talk of the chiefs, our monarchs, our traditional rulers, they were doing it better because they were providing services despite the fact that they are regarded as brutal and dictators in these Eurocentric sources of information, as earlier I said before, but which was not the case. There are some leaders that tried to revive the systems, the ancient systems. For example, Uganda had Idi Amin that was trying to revive the ancient system of African true leadership. And you saw what he did for Africa. Despite the fact that the Eurocentric sources of information regard him as a horrible president that has never existed in Uganda. But to my own understanding, it seems diplomacy and democracy has rather been branded as dictatorship, and the reverse is true. You get it?
sure dictatorship has been branded as democracy, and democracy has been branded as dictatorship.
That's the information, that's the statement that I uttered. And how does this come? Because when you look at, let's focus on Africa, especially. When you focus on African presidents that have been branded as dictators, Idi Amin of Uganda, the foundation he laid for Uganda, it's the foundation still that is being run on too. They are just developing it. And when you look at the presidents around him, they have only tried to develop the foundation that he left, but they have not initiated new programs for the development and for the growth of this country. When you look at which other dictator can I talk about? When you look at Muammar Gaddafi, he was branded as a dictator in Libya. And after his exit from the governance and the ruling of Libya, we have seen what is taking place in Libya. And this is all because our history has been buried in the soils and we need to unbury it.
Uh, we talk about slavery that happened in Africa. Could could it be possible that this slavery was not just actually, which was aimed at, of course, getting human labor? Could it be possible that this slavery was actually targeting the taking away of Africa's human skilled labor that we are manufacturing and upholding the African technologies and artisan industries to go and build civilizations for the Europeans? Would it be possible in such kind of perspective?
If you look at the way they used to get these slaves, the methods they used raidings, they could surround a community. But when you look at the way they used to choose these slaves that were to be sold as terms of providing human labor, they picked out the skilled human resources out of the community. Never did they take the lame, never did they take the young, especially they took energetic and skilled men from Africa. Why did they take them? On their arrival, they found a united Africa. They divided it along political lines, they divided it along religious lines and social lines. So they used this divide and rule. They abducted our skilled labor, they exported it to their continents, and this skilled labor was used to develop their continent, leaving Africa in a state of just residing and waiting for what is made from Europe to be consumed on the continent of Africa.
Could it be possible that the civilization we are seeing in different sectors like music, the development of the pianos, the development of the fridges, the development of sophisticated weapons of nuclear warfare, that today, that the foundation of it was developed on the skilled men that were taken to act as workers on their farms and
First of all, before we go so far, you have to put in your mind and you have to begin that the materials, the raw materials that are used for making those sophisticated technologies and weapons, you do not have to forget that they come from Africa. Their original source is from Africa. When you look at uranium, when you look at iron ore, petroleum products, all are exported, all are being got from the land of Africa. So, with raw materials that are not from their sources, I do not think they can forge something out of it without someone who has prior knowledge about the materials that they are using to make the sophisticated technologies we are seeing that are coming up to date.
so you mean that all of those technologies that we're seeing today, they actually are an offspring of of the labors of our ancestors that were taken as skilled labor.
By the fact that they have an origin from Africa, that is an automatic case that they have a hand with Africa. That's what you have to understand.